Márton Schlanger, the Republican Institute political scientist with expertise in Hungarian politics and European affairs. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for joining. It's almost 15 years that Viktor Orbán has been a Hungarian prime minister, having conducted a sort of revolution, one might say, taking over the judiciary bit by bit, the media. We know how the system works and how the system is being hacked, and actually taking Hungary to the fringe of the European Union with an open support for Vladimir Putin. Is this coming to an end?
Well, that's a very common question we are asked after, there's elections in Hungary in 6 months, and the opposition is leading in polls. This is the first time in 16 years that an opposition party alone is leading the polls, and while voters are quite hopeful because of this, I'm a pollster by profession, and I'm not as hopeful just yet. I think that it's really hard to say if it's coming to an end or not, but it is sure that Viktor Orbán and his party is in a state of all-in for these elections, and that in terms of civil society, in terms of rule of law, in terms of all of these things, I think that they are pushing everything to the limit in hopes of winning this election, because there are many circumstances which point to maybe a more difficult election for the governing party, and this is the first.
What is he prepared to do, Viktor Orbán, to save his power, in spite of the falling polls that we know of?
The easiest way to answer this, the short answer would be everything, but the easy way to answer it is that people say, or people worry that there's election fraud on the day of elections. Many opposition voters or many civil organization employees, many even outside organizations, always go to, on the day of polling, always go to individual polling places in the countryside, everywhere, to prevent election fraud.
Are you realistically expecting election fraud? That would be a big thing. That's a European Union country, after all, a member of the community.
There is election fraud, but your question reinforces the point here, is that election fraud majorly doesn't happen on the day of the elections. Election fraud is what happens the year before, or even the years before. And to the question, how far will Viktor Orbán go, is that election fraud is happening constantly throughout the 4 years.
What is it? What is it about?
It is changing the election system before every election. It is using state funds for party campaigning. It is dismantling media. It is conquering civil society. Election fraud in itself, and then just the fact that maybe there's some classical examples of election fraud happening on the day of elections, that's just the tail of the dog, so to say.
In Poland, it was possible, instead of all these things, perhaps not to the extent that Hungary is suffering from at the moment, but it was still possible for the opposition to win the elections. I know that you are quite skeptical and cautious in your diagnosis, but realistically, do you believe that it's possible for the opposition to win the election?
It is possible. If I had to be, there's two hats I can wear. One is the pollster, the number guy, who would say that out of cautiousness, the opposition would have to lead by, let's say, 8% over the course of 6 months to be able to say it's fine. But my other hat, more analytical, is that in Poland there were many parties collaborating, and we did the same in 2021-22.
It didn't work.
It didn't work, and there's one thing that Poland can do that Hungary couldn't do, is that in the Polish opposition, there were parties who said, we are already in parliament, we see the polls, we are easily in parliament, so now you shouldn't vote for me, you should vote for this and that party, so they also make it, because that's how the mathematics will work. And in Hungary, at the development that civil society and politics is, it is impossible. It is unimaginable for one party to campaign for another in terms of winning. So this is why having one party being stronger than the government is such a huge deal.
Márton, in your opinion, what is the biggest asset of Peter Magyar? Let's mention his name first time in this program. That's the leader of the opposition, a possibly winner in the next election if things go right for you, for the democratic opposition now. What's his biggest asset, political asset?
I think it's hard to say. I think the easiest way to say it, his biggest asset is he's a talented politician, and he has a team of experts, although invisible, but his asset is also his weakness, because his asset is that he is a talented politician who is essentially ruling his party with an iron grip, just like Viktor Orban. But this is also a drawback. Yes, it's hard to say. He says he's a conservative liberal, if that's a thing, but it's also kind of a downside for him, because in Fidesz, even though Viktor Orban is leading, there are many people in Fidesz party who have worked together for decades, and the pressure, like on a net, dissolves, but Péter Magyar handles all pressure alone, and he makes all decisions alone. So what makes him very strong, coming from the governing party circles actually, he is the ex-husband of the former Minister of Justice. This is also kind of a weakness to him. It's hard to say.
Would you agree with the statement that Viktor Orban somehow found a key to the Hungarian soul?
I think that it's really hard to say with populist government whether the key was found or a lock was made or forced. I think that the Hungarian voters, especially Fidesz voters, are very adaptable. I think they adapted to Viktor Orban. I think they adapted to the narratives of the government, and it changes. One of the things that you can say, apart from others, is that the stance on Russia has changed in favor of Russia over the course of 2 years in Fidesz voters. So Viktor Orban has the ability, the finances and the powers to shape voter behavior. So he didn't really have to adapt. He adapted for 10 years, and then the second 10 years was spent on essentially adapting the population to his needs.
What happens, in your opinion, what happens when Viktor Orban loses the election? Because losing or winning the election is just step number one. Poland is actually going through exactly the same problem, because even in the big leader, the leader on top goes, the rest of the administration stays, judiciary that is changed, the media and so on and so forth, and it's really hard to straighten it out.
I could give a long answer, but I don't think that there's time or that would be necessary. But there's a term, I'm sure it's not a Hungarian specific term, or pair of terms rather, state party and party state. Party state, of course, referring to a party democracy where many parties fight for power, and state party is when state and party merge together. And this is the case in Hungary, although Fidesz politicians take offense in this, but they started preparing for this nightmare scenario of them losing the elections in 21, and they are doing it right now also ahead of 26, and the extent of damage, of loss of resources and power will only be revealed once they lose the elections. But I think that being in power after the Fidesz government is a harder job even than winning the elections after 16 years of Fidesz rule.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
Well, you also analyze in your works the American influences in Europe, but in Hungary in particular. How much do you think what's happening in America and the United States will influence state of affairs in Hungary?
It's a bit two-sided, because first of all, whatever happens in the US influences the entire world, including Hungary, and Viktor Orban was one of the first to support Trump, and because of this, in the media they are portrayed as good friends.
Yes, he counted very much on Putin and Trump meeting in Budapest. It's not going to happen.
It doesn't seem to happen, yes. But so on the one hand, everything that happens in the US influences everything in the world and in Hungary. On the other hand, Fidesz voters, Viktor Orban's voters, know nothing about the outside world. So it's really hard to say direct influence. I am 100% sure, and I might have to be quoted on this when I'm wrong, but I'm 100% sure that Trump will visit Hungary in the campaign to campaign for Viktor Orban.
So you think that he will give him a full support during the campaign?
I am quite sure, even though his administration may have, the more expert side of things, would probably have many issues with Hungary's ties to Russia, to China, but I think Trump himself is a man of basically.
So that's even less predictable than the outcome of the elections in Hungary.
Yeah.
But look what's happening in the United States. The protests. People are actually taking to streets to say very loudly, to say no, to protest. We've seen it. Can that have some kind of impact on what's happening in Hungary?
I think the protests, not even Hungarian protests, have a long-term effect, unfortunately, in Hungary. So US protests, I think 99.9% of Hungarians don't know about protests in the US. They don't even know. I don't think most Hungarians could name 5 US states. So I'm not sure, but there is one effect. I call it, it's not right, but I call it the Trump effect, or the Trump technique, is that Trump goes into his first day in Congress and starts talking about gender swapping funding for mice under the Biden administration. So Biden administration funding gender swaps for mice. And Viktor Orban says the same, say the most outrageous, obscure thing in media to take control of media, of the debate. And this is what Viktor Orban has been increasingly doing since Trump was so successful in using this technology, for instance.
Well, you've said that. I'm worried about one thing. You've mentioned it a couple of times, that people in Hungary, or most people in Hungary to be precise, don't know much about the outside world, probably because of the oppression of the media, I can imagine. Aren't you worried about not only changing the government, not only an attempt to change the system back to the liberal democracy, but are you not worried about the sentiment of the people when that happens?
In terms of sentiment of people, I think the biggest fear, and this is largely due to how Fidesz and Viktor Orban is preparing for this election very aggressively, very divisively. The real danger, I think, in terms of citizen sentiment is that whatever the result, but especially if the governing party loses, is that there's going to be kind of a civil war mentality, and that it's going to
like
get
the one
physical.
We see on Capitol.
I think
Capitol Hill, that is.
Exactly. I think, I think that could happen. But I think it wouldn't stop in 1 week if that were to happen. It wouldn't, because the U.S. is a more.
You're ready for a revolution?
Well, I wouldn't want a revolution per se, such as that. I would rather a peaceful transfer of power, even perhaps a peaceful keeping of power.
You don't believe in it, do you?
I believe in revolution, but I think it'd be a revolution of the mind. People being more. Less cynical, less apolitical, less or more concerned.
Yes, but you need some kind of ignition. You need something to.
Of course, but I think the aggression in terms of, you know, if there's a regime change and what I see in Viktor Orban's communications, the aggression would not be a spark. I think it'd be aggression for the sake of aggression, and I don't want to paint the devil on the wall. I don't think it will happen.
Right.
But the situation right now really is. It's a perfect, unfortunately, perfect environment for such physicalities to take place.
You're acting as a policy watchdog, the organization that you're representing, Rubicon, and you're describing yourself as aiming to influence public debate and shedding light on the operations of the government and different political parties. Have you been victim of political repercussions?
Yes. I am proud to say we have this sort of sovereignty law, or we have many laws suppressing civil society, suppressing any organizations that are not funded or not just funded but not run by the government.
Of the state?
Absolutely. We are actually. It's essentially a patent of quality in Hungary. We are actually a threat to national sovereignty, Republican Institute. The Sovereignty Protection Office, led by major propagandists of the government, is solely responsible in deciding who's a threat to national sovereignty and who's not, and we are.
What are the practical consequences of this?
The most practical consequences was going to be part of a law that was not yet passed, I think, because of a strong influence from outside, luckily, in Hungary, even some powers that are perhaps scary to Viktor Orban. But basically what is supposed to happen, and is supposed to happen soon, is that you will not be able to receive foreign funding whatsoever. And if you did, you would be fined.
Are you seriously concerned about your future?
Not our own future. I would be concerned of the future of other civil organizations, other foundations, because our work is very rentable. We can work on the market, but elderly care, civil services, they cannot work on the market. So if they are not allowed to receive funding from outside, and they are not receiving funding for 5 years from the government, there's no survival scenario for civil society, for that kind of civil society.
But we'll stop here. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Thank you so much.
Márton Schlanger. Thanks very much.